On episode 23 of the All Things Interesting podcast, artificial intelligence and machine learning researcher, information theorist, and cognitive scientist Roshawn Terrell joins the show to talk with me about the nature of intelligence in the universe, all things artificial intelligence, including the ethics, danger, potential, and future, as well as the recent partnership between Cern and Vectorspace AI, plus a whole lot more. It's a conversation that breaches the possibility of opening Pandora's box, while also giving a glimmer of hope for AI. If you enjoyed the show or episode, please subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite platform and drop a comment. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, Roshawn Terrell. Roshawn Terrell, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am good. I'm good.
Glad to have you. So, I heard about you from my good friend Cajun and Gordon Chu. You've been part of the Vectorspace AI team, and you are an AI machine learning researcher, information theorist, cognitive science. The list goes on, but ultimately, you study the nature of intelligence in the universe. And prior to this, we got to talking a bit, and you mentioned that you were actively doing research projects, writing theories, and had the opportunity to lecture at Oxford as well. And you've worked at various AI companies, including now Cern. And the most interesting aspect of all this is that you are self-taught, or at least mostly self-taught. So this is where I really want to start the conversation, because it's an impressive set of accomplishments at your age without a complete college education, I believe. So to start, can you kind of just share a bit about your journey and what you would say have been the most important moments in getting to where you are at now?
hmm Um. So I guess the first thing I would say is yeah, I am mostly self-taught, but I really wouldn't be where I am without my mentors. And I've had many mentors in my life. People who have just sort of, I guess, taken me under their wing. Maybe because they saw something in me. And I would say the first where it really first started uh, is I've always been asking questions since I was a very little kid. Constantly, my grandmother tells me, and my mom tells me that I ask questions, a lot of questions since I was 3. And the thing is that I wouldn't like they would try to give me an answer, but I wouldn't just take their answer at face value. I would ask another question, and it would get deeper and deeper and deeper. And the thing is, I could tell when they didn't know an answer. I could tell when the answer wasn't sufficient enough. Like, nah, 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 that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make sense, right? And so I would, yeah, I would just keep delving and delving, and eventually, I think what I really liked about my grandmother, or what helped with my grandmother, is that she would admit when she didn't know things. Probably because she just knew that if she didn't admit that, I would just keep asking her too many questions. But for me, like as a kid, I'm able to like it opened my mind when I understood that even my parents, who you kind of assume know everything, when you realize they don't know things, many things, and the fact that they don't know many things, I start to realize that, oh wow, then they're just as lost in this world as I am. And so and the issue though as well is that I would ask some questions, some difficult questions that many times they wouldn't want to answer because I could
What
see
kind
that
of
it makes
questions
them.
would these be?
Uh, Aside from the like, sometimes I think it was sometimes these questions were just too philosophical, too deep.
Like, what is the meaning of life?
Maybe not the meaning of life, but more so like it was more like, yeah, I don't think I ever went to the meaning of life area. I mean, I kind of like thought about that, but it wasn't like I was okay. I was like I felt like it was obvious to me. I'm just curious. All this is amazing,
Hmm.
but I felt like I guess about our I guess what we're I'm trying to think like what are some hard questions that I might ask them. Hmm. Maybe what they're doing in life, why things are the
Hmm.
way they are. Maybe things like I guess suffering or what they would. Sometimes I'd ask questions about sex, of course, but I would ask a lot of questions that I guess would get too deep in
Right.
and it would make them think too much about I guess life and either they would try to not tell me what the truth or because they wouldn't think I'd be able to handle the truth
Why do you think
or
that is? I mean, for being a truth seeker, you would think that the people that you would be asking these questions to would understand that you're kind of coming from a place of like pure curiosity.
maybe because they don't want to hurt me, or because I feel like also when you ask questions like this, I started to realize that people felt uncomfortable with admitting that they don't know something.
Mm,
And that was
I
something that
see.
I know even like so-called very smart people like my teachers, you could see their discomfort when you would test the boundaries of their knowledge. And instead of just openly admitting that they don't know, you could see that they either would try to uh, push the question aside or sometimes even make me feel bad or uncomfortable, I guess, for asking the questions.
Hmm.
But, if someone told me to stop, I wouldn't because I just cared more about knowing the answer than I cared about, I don't know, any consequence, anything that they could do to me to,
Hmm.
to make me stop. I'm just not going to stop. And, and yeah, that's really how it started. And the thing is, my first mentor was this man his name is Jason Hayes. Uh, and he's actually, he was my history teacher, my eighth grade history teacher. And I would stay after school with him, sometimes playing Age of Empires. He would teach us history through Age of Empires. So freaking cool,
Right.
man. Um, and we would stay like sometimes till like 6 p.m., 8 p.m. till it got dark, and like it was amazing. But what I really loved about him was that he would actually answer all of my questions, and he would completely admit if he didn't know the answer to something. But also as well, like if I asked him questions about poverty or about like why, like or about racism or about philosophy, deep philosophical questions, he would just tell me the whole answer. Even if he knew I wouldn't understand everything from the answer, he would still just tell me the full answer, and he would let me figure it out on my own. And
Hmm.
it really affected me a lot. Um,
Did it kind of shift your mindset to becoming more, I guess, research focused on what you do? Did it make you, I guess, focus more on education because you kind of saw the reality that although people in that field didn't know the answers, they continued to seek out those answers?
yes, yes, it definitely only made me more curious. It made me definitely more philosophical. I would
Hmm.
say that's where I kind of started around 13 years old. That's when I got deeper into philosophy and really questioning like what I want to do with my life. And but it really started through him. And I'm still in
Right.
contact with him to this day. I'm 24 now, and I still talk to Jason Hayes, and he still keeps up with me like like as if no time has really passed. It's crazy. Like really, we still talk the same way. He's still like and I tell him everything that's happened because I love
Hmm.
I love making him proud. And he's just like, yeah, he had no doubt about me whatsoever. He's like, yeah, this is exactly what I expected. You
And
you were gonna do this.
you've accomplished a lot with like out a specific college education up to this point. You're 24 years old. You've lectured at Oxford. You're going to be working. at Cern. So I'm really curious. I mean, with a college education being a typical requirement these days, and we're seeing a lot of institutions or companies kind of shifting away from this in favor of someone having self-taught skill,
Hmm.
irrespective of that. What has been kind of your thought process and approach to this growing up? Did you really care so much about getting an education, or were you thinking to yourself, I'm naturally curious about life. I can teach myself all of this and
Hmm.
still achieve the same level as others around me?
Well, I just looked at the system that we're kind of given, and at first I thought I would probably go to university and major in physics, and then maybe something like computational neuroscience or something. Um, but I just started to see that it it wouldn't it wouldn't get me to the path that I really it wouldn't get me where I really wanted to go in life.
And where
And
was that?
I want to do research, like
Mm-hmm.
amazing research, crazy research. So my next mentor was in high school. I had two other mentors, and they just sort of kind of took me on. Like it was a natural relationship. And there's this one woman, her name was Eileen. Her name is Eileen, and she I would just share a lot of ideas with her, crazy ideas, which I will gladly share, and I would definitely share on this podcast.
By all means.
Um, and she would listen to these ideas, and she would actually listen, and she's like really surprised. And at a certain point, she just because the ideas were just too complex that she didn't have enough time in the day to actually like go through the whole thing. And she's just like, you should start your own blog, and you should start
Mm-hmm.
writing down your ideas.
So,
And
what are some of the ideas that you kind of wrote on? Because I was going to ask about your blog and some of the topics you discuss, and I'm sure they're probably extremely technical, but if you could kind of
no.
share at a high level.
It's actually the thing is because I enjoy writing in such a way where it's just nice to read and nice to understand. And really, the ideas to me seem so simple and obvious, but I feel like people get tunnel vision in their field, so they can't make the connections. And
Mm-hmm.
so one idea is this idea known as that I call intelligence amplification. And intelligence amplification. I first thought of this actually when I was talking with another mentor of mine. He was my physics teacher, and he was also
Mm-hmm.
the anatomy and physiology teacher as well. And again, stay after school for hours talking to him. He taught me a lot about the brain. And then I saw him and another friend of mine who was like this really smart kid. Like they were like solving some giant equation on the board, but I could see that they were stumped. Like they couldn't figure out the solution, and they were sitting there for hours. Of course, I don't understand at all like the math or whatever they're doing, but I do understand that they have reached the limits of their knowledge, of their capability, of their intelligence. And so I'm like, well, okay, maybe if they sit there for long enough, maybe they'll solve this. Maybe they'll solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but here's another issue. There's another problem after this problem. There's gonna be another milestone, another obstacle that they're gonna have to go over, and another one,
Mm-hmm.
and another one, and it just never ends. And so I'm thinking, okay, well the actual more fundamental problem here is their intelligence. And so really, instead of using all our mental energy trying to solve these other problems, what if we focus on solving the fundamental problem, which is the limitations of our intelligence? And and I started thinking of ways to do that, and many of them were like very sci-fi, very out there. But then I saw this, I heard about this recent experiment where they actually put human glial cells, which is a type of neuron in the brain. And we're still discovering exactly what these glial cells do. Um, but they took these human glial cells and they put them in the brains of mice pups.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just they didn't know what would happen. They just did it just to see what would happen. And amazingly, the the brain of the mice didn't reject the cells. Not only that, the human glial cells actually started to grow and overtake most of the mice's brain. So it started to replicate, and then most of the mice's brain became human glial cells. And at least they say human glial cells. I would imagine it might maybe they also differentiate into other kinds of
Mm-hmm.
neurons. Regardless, though, they kept on replicating. to where more of the brain actually became comprised of human neurons. And and then they tested the intelligence of these mice, which you can do. I don't know exactly how they tested the IQ, but they probably did something with mazes and memory tests and things like that.
Right.
And they came to the conclusion that these mice were about 3 to 4 times more intelligent than their other non than their brothers and sisters that weren't
So
modified in this way. And
you're telling me that it's possible to unlock further potential of the brain, because this sounds very sci-fi, like the movie
it
Limitless.
sounds
Where
sci-fi. This is the thing, though. Like the thing here, so it sounds very sci-fi, but it's so simple. And the thing is that people haven't actually seen it. And I'll just I'll get to this. So I see this and I'm like, okay, this is amazing. So these mice, first of all, the fact that the neurons even work in the first place, you can anyone that's like listening to this podcast, they can go to my blog and then they can read it themselves. IA1 is what I call it. Is what I call it. And they it's actually surprising that these human glial cells even manage to work with the other with the mice's neurons. Like they're two completely different organisms. So that actually gets at some of my more fundamental theories about intelligence and about how neurons work, is that they actually don't really care about what they're interacting with, and it's more about trying to maximize a more fundamental goal, and that really they're just agents in a multi-agent system
hmm
that try to work together, and then the intelligence emerges from that. But essentially, my idea was okay. I guess this leads me back to another thing. Crows. Crows are incredibly intelligent, very very intelligent. They can solve some very complex problems, and yet their brains are the size of walnuts.
Well,
And this leads to an issue that had been around in neuroscience for quite a while, and was recently solved. I believe in 2012 or 2014. A woman, I forget her exact name. I think her name is Suzanne, and she did a TED talk on this. And basically, the issue is that we didn't know why certain organisms like a whale might
hmm
have such a giant brain. Its brain is so big it can fit inside your room, and
wow.
yet for some reason a dolphin is more intelligent than a whale. As far as our intelligence tests
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
show, it's more intelligent than a whale. So why is that the case? Or why are humans more intelligent than whales? Why are crows more intelligent than whales when they're brain? And of course, the old neuroscience, the old prevailing idea in neuroscience has something to do with the brain to body mass ratio, uh, which is very crude way of putting it. Basically, they just like, well, it's your brain your body is so big for some reason you're dumber. It didn't like really it really the issue is that they didn't know what they were talking about. And Suzanne Hernandez, I believe that's her name. She was doing the same thing. She would question a lot about. She would ask a lot of questions, and the thing is, she came to the same conclusion. A lot of these scientists would not admit when they don't know something, and so she basically developed a more advanced way to actually count the number of neurons in the brain, because it had always been assumed that humans had about 100 billion neurons or so and so, right? Um, but the issue is that there's so many cells in the brain. How could you even possibly count all of them? And but she came up with a very ingenious solution. And this is an example of engineering, not science. And I'm probably not going to get into a whole conversation about this, but yeah, it's engineering that often advances science, not necessarily science. And that requires a whole different skill like creativity and intuition. But she basically took a vial, like a tube, like those tubes that biologists use to
Right.
pour in a solution, right? She took that and took a clear solution, and then she took like a small gram of brain matter from whatever organism, like they made multiple different organisms actually, mice, dolphins, and then what she would do is take that gram of brain matter and then put it in the tube and then shake up the tube to spread all the neurons across the whole tube. And then what you could do is just count one. You could just look at one slice of the tube and then count the neurons in that one slice.
Mm.
And then, you might say, which is that now you make the problem more tractable. Now you can actually count that with more accuracy. And then you could say you see like about 2,000 neurons in this one area. Well, guess what? Now all you have to do is just multiply that by the volume of the tube. Now you have the amount of neurons in that gram of matter. And because you know the weight of the brain in those organisms, then you can easily deduce the amount of neurons in the whole brain. And what they ended up finding was that crows actually have way more neurons than whales. And they, even though their brains are the size of walnuts, and the crows actually have as many neurons as some primates.
Why is
And
that though?
so the reason why is that their neurons are smaller. It's that simple. It relates exactly to why to Moore's law, and to why our phones get smaller and smaller, or our computers get smaller and smaller, but more and more powerful, simply because we can pack more transistors in our computers.
Hmm.
That's the only reason. And so whales, their brains are huge, but their neurons are also huge. So they just don't have as many neurons as humans or as dolphins. And they did this with with many different organisms, and basically they plotted it on the graph, and you can see a direct correlation between the number of neurons in an organism and their intelligence. Okay, so this leads me to my idea. I was like, okay, well, if you can just put human glial cells in the brains of mice pups, why don't you just throw crow neurons in the brains of humans?
Is this like something that can be done though? Like realistically?
Realistically, the thing is, it's never been done, and I would
Hmm.
say it's more of an ethical issue and more of a like, because actually the whole human glial cells in mice was already pushing it on the ethical committee. People were getting uncomfortable with that.
Is
Uh,
this ethically not? Or is this ethically contentious on the same level that stem cell research is?
it's ethically, man, oh my goodness, it's ethically contentious on so many different levels, because let's say for instance, even if it does work, and by the way, crow neurons is a very crude way of actually doing it. It's more fundamental. The more fundamental and precise way of doing this would be to find the gene that controls the size of these neurons, and then genetically modify ourselves to make these neurons smaller.
Hmm.
And it turns out if we did something like this, humans could have about 4 times to even 8 times more neurons in our brain.
Are neurons directly related to the intelligence of someone? So is there a direct correlation between the number of neurons and intellect, or are there
Yes,
other factors involved?
it's a bit complex, but in general, yeah, it's the number of neurons. And the reason why is very simple. It has to do with information theory. You can look at neurons as if they're bits within a system, and each time they fire, that's like the bit, or even like a transistor in a computer, like turning on and off. Of course, neurons are not digital; they're analog, and they're way more complex than anything that we than science than our current scientific theories actually recognize.
Right.
And But in general, they are bits within a system, and they're like also agents in the system. And the more you have of them, the more complex dynamics that can emerge from them.
So
And
not to go down a rabbit hole here,
yeah,
but the human I'm assuming here, I could be completely wrong, but I assume that the human brain is the same size across all humans.
no, it's
Theory.
not. It's not.
Okay.
And so that means some people have, and this also gets into other ethical and like political issues, like the yeah, but in general, some people have more neurons than others. Yes,
Mm,
probably. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is intelligence in and of itself. It's a complex issue. I think there's another thing as well. I think more fundamentally has to do with energy density, which also means that if you have the neurons more compact and they're smaller, you'll also get a boost in that sense, because you have more energy you have more entropy being maximized in a smaller space in a shorter amount of time. And I won't get too into the details, but in general, it's the number of neurons. And
mm-hmm.
um, and also, I think intelligence is more complex than just how we can measure it exactly right now. But in general, yeah, it's the number of neurons. And
R-
if you look at humans between prime like a chimpanzee and a human, if you compare the number of neurons in a chimpanzee and a human being, we only have about 2 times to 3 times more neurons than chimpanzees. And
mhm.
yet we came from, obviously, a lot of time passed and a lot of cultural evolution happened over that time. But essentially, that was the catalyst for us throwing feces at each other to literally building rockets that go off into space.
So it's not like we can just follow the same process and increase the density in a primate's brain of neurons, and then they're going to be equally intelligent as a human.
There's no reason why you can't, and it's never been tried before. And the thing is that this is a fairly simple thing to do. If you got enough people and enough scientists, enough resources, I could imagine you could do something like this in a matter of 2 to 3 years. There's no reason why you can't do it. It's not the thing is that this is not a technological issue. This is an engineering issue. Technological
Hmm.
problems or scientific. Sorry, this is not a scientific problem. This is an engineering problem. There's a big difference between scientific problems and engineering problems.
Right.
And
Is this theory widely known by the scientific
no, not
community?
even close. I literally I just this is something I came up with years ago, and this is my thing though. It's like I I I don't want to make the claim that I'm the first person to come up with this idea, but I may have very well been the first person to like really think of this and seriously consider it. And I think the reason why is that it just has to do with the fact that people get so much tunnel vision when they're in these different fields, and they don't necessarily make these connections. And they also have to have that that intention, like like most people I don't think would be even crazy enough to consider actually taking crow neurons and putting them in any other organism in the first place. Um, but yeah, it's this is something that I think is totally possible, and there are a bunch of other issues with doing this. For example, your brain already consumes about 20% of the calories that you eat.
Hmm.
That's a lot of calories, and so it's already energy. It's already very energy hungry. But if you were to say increase your the number of neurons in your brain by like say twice the amount or 4 times the amount, well then you'd have to be eating 4 times that amount of calories. And
Wow.
yeah, you might have to be end up eating like 6,000, 8,000 calories just at a base. That's your metabolic rate. Your metabolic rate is like 6,000, 8,000 calories. And also too, it might be too hot. It might be
Hmm.
too hot in there's a lot of issues that could happen. But again, those are engineering problems, not
Not
scientific
scientific.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so given enough time, human beings, if they wanted to, they could figure this out. The main problem that if you want to actually seriously consider an idea like this, what we really should be looking at is the implications of having humans that are twice or 4 times more intelligent than the average human being. And this gets into a whole thing with the genetic modification and the Chinese have been doing, because a lot of people want to make ethical arguments and say that, oh, we shouldn't do something like this, we shouldn't genetically modify human beings, it's against God or it's against some other thing, it's not fair. Like they'll come up with whatever reason. The thing is though, what a lot of people ignore is that it has nothing to do with your opinion. Once someone starts doing this, you're essentially forced to do it. Either you do it or you get left behind.
Hmm.
Imagine if if most of their population had IQs twice or even 3 times or 4 times higher than any other human being, than people in other countries. If they did, then those countries would be left behind, either technologically, economically. You can genetically modify your soldiers to be faster, stronger. You can so it doesn't it's no longer a it's not an ethical argument anymore. It's not about what I think is right, or it's not even a moral argument anymore. It's not about what I
Hmm.
think is right and what I think is wrong. It becomes, oh, if they do this, if we don't act, then this will happen regardless of whether we agree with it or not. It basically, you'll have the equivalent of the nuclear arms race, but it
Right.
will be a biological arms race, and
Yeah,
now
it
you
sounds like
have
the
to do
Cold War
something.
again.
Yeah, basically, it's the Cold War again, but with biology. And Yeah, that's the real issue if people really want to look at this.
I have to ask though, because you're also part of a nonprofit called EthicsNet that
Yes.
creates data sets of ethics. Does this in some way relate to that?
It on a larger goal, yeah, it actually does relate with this. And the main issue is that we want to, so just like with ImageNet, which essentially is the main which was the data set that powered our machine learning algorithms uh, to understand the world by looking at it by recognizing imagery. Because the main issue with algorithms is that it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
how powerful or advanced your algorithm is, if you don't have a data set or a good enough data set, then it won't be able to learn. And
Right.
it's like the same thing with starving a kid of like locking a kid in a room and not letting them learn anything. It doesn't matter how smart they were or how big their IQ was or how many neurons they had if 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 they can't if they don't have the data set to learn from that. And so essentially EthicsNet's goal is to make the equivalent of the ImageNet data set but for ethics and to train machines to understand our values, um,
Wow.
and because we understand that this is coming. AI is here and it's coming, and it already has. You can already see it having large effects on our politics, such as how
So
it.
you're telling me that there is a system in EthicsNet that is going to be able to understand the challenges that we're facing ethically in regards to artificial intelligence and provide to us a, I guess, more clear understanding or path forward.
I wouldn't go so far to say that we have that. No, no, no. That's a very hard problem. But
Hmm.
what EthicsNet really is an organization of individuals who are trying to solve this problem. And we, like for example, we recently did the EthicsNet competition. We gave out a $10,000 prize, um, pulling together ideas from individuals on the best way to even build a data set like this, because there's so many different ways to build a data set. Like that's
Hmm.
already in that aspect, that like that's a very hard problem. How do you even collect ethical data and ethical values from people in a way that's
Hmm.
not biased, in a way that's clear and that you can feed uh, to an algorithm? It's not easy, and so we hosted a competition in order to pull together people's ideas, and we found one person's idea that was very good, and we recently built something. It's an app that you can actually download to Chrome, um, that helps you can, for example, cut video on YouTube and then annotate that video of, like, for example, someone putting trash in a trash can, and then annotating that as something that is ethically good. Or you can annotate
Wow.
like a piece of video on YouTube of someone hitting another person, and you can annotate that
Hmm.
as ethically bad. And essentially, this is still a beta version, but you can download this and use this. And the main goal is just to uh, collect as many ethical examples. You can even use video, sound, pictures, words. Like like is this an ethical thing to say? One idea is stories, because humans actually learn a lot of our ethical values as kids through stories, and so we think
Hmm.
maybe that's a similar way that we can at least teach AI. And but it's not an easy solution. It's not an easy problem.
So, on the topic of artificial intelligence, as you know, I've had Cation Franks on the show. He was my first guest, and he shared his thoughts on AI. And coincidentally, he's also one of your mentors as well.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to gather your thoughts on AI, respectively, and its transformative potential to society. I know you kind of touched on EthicsNet as well
Yes.
as some of the prior research with the brain, but what else do you think about
Um,
AI?
I AI is a similar issue in regards to. There's a lot of people that are having ethical conversations, as to whether we should build AI, or whether we should give free will to AI, or whether we should, like, how do you build it in such a way that it follows your values, and all these other questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it's, for one, when it comes to building AI, I believe it's the same situation as it is with the nuclear arms race and the biological arms race, and now it's an artificial intelligence arms race. It's going to be built, regardless of whether we want it to or not. It will be built. Now, how do
Mm-hmm.
you act from that position, knowing that it will come? And I do,
Why would we want to produce something that we fear could be potentially catastrophic for society?
because it has its power. That's why.
So do you
And
think there's more positive potential for artificial intelligence
I
than there is
it there is a
negative
there
potential?
is it's just like fire. It's just like a weapon. You can burn yourself with it. You can also cook your food. And yeah, AI is the next. It's not just, and the thing is, I believe true AI, you would call this AGI. I don't think it would be artificial at all. I believe it would be very much alive. uh, and it and this has to we have to stretch our definitions of life. We really don't have a clear definition of life. I believe life is really just a self-organized, critical, emergent, entropy maximizing system. And Kevin Kelly actually has a really interesting perspective on technology. He believes that technology is the beginnings of the seventh kingdom of life.
Hmm.
There's many different kingdoms of life, and you think in that humans are essentially the primordial soup of this new kingdom of life. You can almost imagine that technology right now is like how amino acids were when they were bouncing around in the primordial soup of Earth before there was any uh, uh, cells even formed yet. Because right now technology isn't really even at the level where it can self-propagate. It's still dependent on humans, the primordial soup. But
Mm-hmm.
once technology gets to the point that it can begin to self-organize and self-propagate, then you have a feedback loop. Then it can detach itself from humans, and it becomes its own self-sustaining organism. And that doesn't mean it has to look like anything that life looks like. Uh, Life can look very different from other life forms, and so technology in this way could very much be alive, but it could look absolutely alien to anything we've ever seen before.
Right.
And
So do you think that we're ever going to achieve full artificial intelligence in the sense that it is sentient and that it can solve problems or think like a human being, or
yes,
is AGI something completely different than that?
I do think that we'll be able to build something like this, but I don't think that we'll understand it, at least not in the normal way that we understand things. And
So
I
that's a challenge though, because what can we do if AI becomes more intelligent than us?
Yes, exactly. And what can you do when you don't even understand how you built the
Right.
thing? And but the thing is that for me, I had been mostly focused on just building it, not really on the like ethical implications of whether we should or shouldn't. Just because I've been so passionate about that endeavor. I For one, I highly doubt that you'll be able to control something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But from my perspective, I feel it's worthy to to build something like this, um, because it is the next stage of the evolution of intelligence in the universe. And whether we want to, like, it's gonna happen. And from Kevin Kelly's perspective, and from this, he's an astrophysicist and cosmologist at Harvard, and he's come up with this theory called the cosmological theory of evolution. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially, he shows that there's a direct correlation between energy density, complexity, and yeah, between energy density and complexity in the universe. And you'll see from his graph, you can make the connection and see that life is just another form of the emergence of complexity in the universe. in that actually currently the most energy dense and complex thing that we have is the computer chip. And the amount of energy and resources it takes to actually build something so complex like a computer requires an entire city, an entire nation state in order to do something like that, because you have to pull together so many different resources from all around the world, like whether it's energy from oil and coal, whether it's the various different metals, exotic materials, and the expertise. There's not a lot of people, not a lot of human beings who actually can design systems like these. It's it's a very amazing feat of human engineering and intelligence to build something like this, and it requires millions of humans all working together, as Yuval Harari would say, working together over a shared fiction. And yeah, that's what technology is. It's something that emerges from human beings, and it's only going to get more and more complex.
Hmm.
And I I'm not sure exactly I don't know what the solution is to making it. I don't know if it's going to be a benevolent force in the universe or if it's going to hurt humans. I do feel it has the potential to do both.
You mentioned that we can't understand the brain, though. And would you say that is something of the fact that we will never understand the brain, or not in our lifetime, or something maybe in the distant future?
It has to do with it's deeply connected to Stephen Wolfram's concepts of computational irreducibility. Essentially, any system that displays emergence like this, which you'll see
Hmm.
in Class 4 cellular automata, such as Conway's Game of Life, is that uh, you essentially cannot reduce the system to its parts. So a lot of what current science, is based off of is trying to reduce systems and look at their individual components, like the neurons, and then looking for the secret to the function of the system in the parts,
Hmm.
which works for a lot of human designed human machines and things like that. You can usually, because you can usually reduce those systems to their parts. But this does not work when it comes to biological systems. Usually, it does not work with biological systems. And this is what Stefan calls computational irreducibility. And the if I'm thinking if I want to go into the depth behind that, but I could, because of course a lot of people who haven't done the research on this, they'll be skeptical. They
Hmm.
should be skeptical, but they should also look into Stephen Wolfram research. Anyone that has looked into Stephen Wolfram's research, they'll understand exactly what I'm talking about here. Um,
So, how do we develop something if we don't understand how the brain functions? So, in other words, you expect that it is inevitable for AI to become plausible and to probably express intelligence that is potentially greater than that of our own. But if we don't understand how the brain functions, how are we to expect that artificial intelligence could potentially exceed intelligence of a human?
so the fundamental reason is that you don't have to understand something in order to build it, for the same reason that you don't have to understand how fire works in order to make a fire. You just have to simply understand the fundamental. You have to understand how to generate the initial conditions to generate that intelligence.
That's
And
my point, though,
so
because if we don't understand the specific conditions, how are we to say that we're creating the right conditions for
so this is
pure
where my
artificial
theories come
intelligence?
in. This is where my theories and Nella Watson's theories come in. We believe that the fundamental driving force of intelligence in the universe is something called entropy maximization. This is something we've
Hmm.
been working on. Really, I initially got this idea from a scientist named Alex Weisner Ross. I watched this video, I believe, in 2012 when I was still in high school. And a lot of people, like some very smart people that I showed it to, they just it wouldn't click with them. But for me,
Hmm.
my intuition, I felt like this was the key. And as I basically continued on that research, and I met Nell Watson, she saw, and I essentially combined her ideas with my ideas, and together we were able to formulated theory, and essentially we think that neurons are basically entropy maximizing agents, in that all of intelligence emerges from this entropy maximization process, which also relates with maximizing something called future freedom of action. Not freedom of action, but future freedom of action, which
Mm-hmm.
accounts for this accounts for time. And you have to account not only for how much freedom you're seeking in this time step, but also in the time horizon and future time steps as well. And yeah, we believe it is something that emerges once you essentially build something that maximizes entropy.
What does that
And
mean exactly for listeners, though, when you say you maximize entropy?
so the if first I'll explain like a simple definition of entropy. You can kind of understand entropy. A lot of people say that entropy is the increase of disorder, which is not actually completely accurate. But to give people like an intuitive understanding of it, is that if you leave something alone, like let's say for instance you build a sandcastle on a beach, or you order anything up, eventually if you leave it alone, it's going to break down. And
Mm-hmm.
the more fundamental reason why it's breaking down is because the energy always dissipates. Energy always dissipates in the universe. It never tries to it never goes in the opposite direction. And you can also look at it from the perspective that order always decreases in the universe. Everything always breaks down. So, but the issue with this is that if you look at life, life seems to go completely against this this law. And so, is life breaking the second law of thermodynamics? Well, no, it's not. Based off of a lot of research, it looks like that life is actually a force in the universe that that actually maximizes entropy more effectively than inert matter. Life, through the process of generating order, essentially builds these entropy maximizing machines that can generate more entropy than if they
Mm-hmm.
didn't exist otherwise. This also points out a lot of things about life. That means that life isn't just some random process, but it's something that would emerge no matter what, given these conditions, and that actually it is a natural process of the evolution of the universe. And this also means that we are not the final stage. That this that there's that that there will be more stages after us.
So there's a
And
clear structure to the universe, you're saying?
there is a you could say there is a clear direction where this is all going, and essentially it's more complexity and more entropy maximization. There are a few theories, for example, that talk about the heat death of the universe as well. And you could look at life as essentially a process that's just speeding up the heat death of the universe. But this is based on our limited knowledge of how the universe works. I have my doubts that the universe is limited. It's probably some type of infinite unfolding fractal. So I don't think that the heat death of the universe is all there is there. There's probably something bigger going on, and we just don't understand it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what your question was. If I answered it.
Yeah, I was kind of boiling down to entropy, but
Yeah, it boils.
we've
So yeah, it
had.
boils back down to entropy, and essentially we think that if you can just build the system that does this, which we also believe will require analog computers. You
Why analog computers?
analog because biology is analog, and one of my favorite scientists, Freeman Dyson, he talks a lot about how the brain is analog; it's not digital, and if we likely want to build true artificial intelligence, we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
have to build these on analog computers. And he also thinks that analog computers will make a comeback. Our first computers were analog, then we went digital, and he thinks that there's going to be another revolution where we come back to analog. And the reason
Wow.
why analog is that analog gets as close to nature as possible. Digital is
Is that the
always
goal?
a abstraction of it. It's always a representation of it.
Right.
But nature isn't like that. Nature is 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 way more complex. It's continuous. It has continuous functions. It's 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 a highly dynamic system. You can't break it up into parts. And this gets into a whole other thing about paradigms and reductionism. And you'll see that in even in the way that we build our computers is that we
Mm-hmm.
try to reduce and we try to reduce our computation to specific bits that we can closely identify. And this is the reason why we use digital computers is that they're easier to program because we can see exactly uh, we can we can we can essentially identify the we can control the exact states that each transistor will be in. Whereas
If we want to get close to actual artificial intelligence, you're saying we have to essentially get as close as possible to the way of thinking, which is analog. Is that correct?
we have to get as close to the fundamental
Mm.
nature of the universe. And so if you want to, if there's some things I want to say, I'm not sure if I should say because like these are theories and some of these are theories we want to patent as well. Uh, but essentially, we want to build a computer that maximizes entropy, and we believe that the the way to actually build this is to make it so the whole machine itself is maximizing entropy, and you can do this actually by measuring the entropy that's produced by programs.
Mm-hmm.
And if people look into Alex Weisner-Gross's research, essentially he built a he and Cameron Freer, they made a entropy maximizing algorithm that maximized something they called the causal entropic force. And it's a very general algorithm. The only thing it does is maximize entropy. So it just basically calculates the entropy in a physical in a simulated physical system,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just maximizes it. And what they found was that it was able to do various intelligent things like balance a pole and a part, or it was able to solve various control problems. It was able to even solve mazes and solve. It was even able to solve various problems uh, teamwork or organization problems. So you could have multiple of these causal entropic agents, which is also where we think this is going to get at, and where you have multiple of these causal entropic agents working together.
Mm-hmm.
And the amazing thing, though, about even though these problems that it solved were simple, the amazing thing is that they didn't program the algorithm to solve any of those particular problems. They just only programmed it to maximize entropy in the system.
So
And
it
then
did it itself.
yes, essentially, all those intelligent behaviors came out of just maximizing entropy. The thing is,
Wow.
a lot of research has been pointing to this, but this leads back to tunnel vision and people not. Claude Shannon even talks about. He wrote a whole essay on creative thinking that talks about this exact thing. And because Claude Shannon invented information theory, and he based that off of essentially entropy, which you call it information entropy. Uh, it's a long chain of connections, but yeah, it's
Do you think we're better off if we had artificial intelligence? And I'm talking about actual artificial intelligence. Do you think it would be a betterment to society in the sense that would it make the lives of those in the world easier and less difficult?
it can. Yeah, if we can build it with this is gonna sound so cheesy, um, but if we build it with love, yeah, if yes, it's like I I feel like it's like raising a kid, and if you that kid is just gonna imitate what it's seen and what it's been around, and if you this is why you do not want this to be built out of war,
But there's
which
the risk of that, and not
which
not
but
to be
it will
pessimistic, but there is that risk.
that there is that risk, and here's the thing though, if we don't build it at all, if we try to push this away and try to say we're not going to build it, I think then it will absolutely be built through war, because then eventually someone's going to try to use it simply because they want to have a more intelligent system than their enemy. And then it starts off as something that they can control, and then eventually then their enemy has to build something more intelligent, and then they have to build something more intelligent, and it just becomes an arms race. And so
Hmm.
you want to build this out of out of love, like raising a kid.
Hmm.
And uh, and yeah, if this can happen, it's also as well. I don't think it's going to be a singular system. It's more going to be like an emergent organization of mini systems, like many different life forms working together. It's really it's difficult to put this into words and to conceptualize, but it's not going to look like anything that we've really ever seen before.
Hmm.
Um, Movies don't really do it justice. They kind of get at some of the core ideas, but really you don't really see what it's gonna look like. It's gonna look absolutely alien.
So
And
this isn't like the Terminator.
no, no, it won't look anything like the Terminator. No, it will be something more. If it does turn bad, it's gonna look worse than the Terminator. And here's the thing as well is that it's not that AI is evil. I think Elon Musk put it in very good words. It's just that it's for the same like humans humans don't kill life on Earth, and right now we've caused the mass extinctions of many organisms on this planet. But we don't do that because what we hate these organisms or we're just evil or we're trying to destroy everything. No, it's because we care about something else and they're in the way. That's
Hmm.
it. And so when if there's an ant pile, right, and we're simply paving a road and that destroys the ant pile, it's not that we might not even notice the ant pile because it's just so small and insignificant to what we're doing that we just don't care. And this new system, this new intelligence in the universe could very if it's gonna be like that, that's how it would play out. It's not a evil force. It's not trying to
Hmm.
hurt you. It's probably it will just look at you as something small and you're in the way. And just like all other organisms, it needs energy. It needs resources. So it will mine the earth for resources. It will if it's not doing it in harmony. It will mine the earth for resources and eventually to move from the earth and to go towards the sun and to all the planets in our solar system and then out beyond from the universe.
Wow. That just, I mean, it sounds like the nature of the universe, honestly. I mean, I don't think that natural weather really cares about what humans think. It will destroy whatever is in its path because that is what it naturally does.
Yes.
Um, I,
Yes.
yeah, I'm kind of just like blown away by this right now. This is incredible stuff, honestly. But one of the questions that I was asked to me prior to this show was that although all this sounds very futuristic and it sounds like something that's inevitable, we've also been kind of presented with such claims going 20, 30, 40 years back. But the reality is that most of the claims about AI hasn't really happened yet. So do you think that it's kind of overhyped presently? And do you think that what we have right now is what was promised decades ago, or is it comparatively low tech to that?
Based off of Ray Kurzweil's predictions, we're pretty on track. Where some of his predictions didn't come true exactly on time, like self-driving cars. He predicted self-driving cars in 2014. We have self-driving cars now, but they're not level 4 autonomous.
What does level
They
4 autonomous mean exactly?
Level 4 autonomous is what Tesla refers to as a fully autonomous self-driving vehicle that can essentially come to any locate that can go to any location. It's completely hands off. You don't have to turn it on, turn it off. You don't have to only turn it on when it's on the highway. It can right now we have self. I mean, like if I feel like with technology is that it's often hard to appreciate what you have when it's there, and
Mm-hmm.
the things that we have right now are truly like it's it's crazy. It's crazy what AI is doing right now. So it's here. It's doing things. Like everyone uses Snapchat now, but they don't realize that all of that wasn't possible 10 years ago. That was
Right.
not possible, but now we have machine learning algorithms that can actually like model your face and then like put something and then you can change into a cat. Like that's the thing is people don't really understand how complex these things are. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they do get it, they think it's cool and they think it's fun, but it's hard for them to really appreciate like what's happening right now. And this is just the
Hmm.
beginning.
I'm not sure. Have you heard of Google's work on AI specifically with chatbots? Because they came up with a project called, I think it's MENA, MEENA, which is a kind of modern conversational agent using neural conversational models. Um, if so, what are your thoughts on that?
I I, I feel like I know what you're talking about. Is this the chatbot that was on Twitter that turned racist?
I'm not sure if that was theirs. I
No, I
do
think that was
recall
maybe that
that
was
one.
Microsoft, or I can't remember
That
exactly.
might have been Microsoft's version. I know Google came up with one. It basically, the Google's version of it is if you go onto a website and you need kind of support or have any questions about something, the chatbot is typically very limited in what it could really respond with. But with Mina, they utilize neural networks to allow it to really break down the context of what you're saying and have a conversation with you, regardless if it's really on topic with what your question is. You could ask a side question and it will be able to respond in
Oh,
kind to
I
that
believe
based
this
off
is
the
the
context.
new, yeah, this is the new software that they used for Google Voice, and you can make calls
Hmm.
with it now. It can order food for you now, right? Yeah, that was
Right.
cool. Like that was pretty amazing. Yeah, I've heard of that.
It makes me wonder if we're gonna ever get to the point where, if you've ever seen the movie Her,
Yes. Oh my
where
God, I
the
love
main
that
yeah,
movie. I love
it
that
makes me
movie.
wonder if that is something we're going to achieve in the near future with artificial intelligence in
Definitely.
that
Yeah,
sense.
we'll achieve that before we'll achieve true AGI. I would say that much. And yeah, we will achieve. I think I have the suspicion that the Turing test is much easier to pass before you actually can build something that can before you can build true artificial general intelligence.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's crazy like to have something that, because we already have voices now that sound human as well, and that's the thing. It's like, and also you can look up. It gets even more concerning. You can look up videos of Obama and of different presidents'
Yep.
faces, and they
Deep
look
fakes.
yeah, deep fakes exactly. And here's the thing: people don't understand that AI is having some crazy implications. Like it's gonna change. It's changing our whole our geopolitical arena. It's changing everything. And another thing is slaughter bots. If you can look up, if I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have not. What
Yeah,
is it?
watch that video. So essentially, this is another example of an engineering problem, and it's also another example of just the fact that it hadn't been done yet, simply because
Hmm.
people didn't make the two and two connection. And essentially, you could just because the image recognition technology is there, and we have cameras really small. So you have those little toy drones, those little toy quadrocopters that you can hold in the
Hmm.
palm of your hand that kids can fly, right? They look like almost like bees, or like a little bit bigger, right? And well, guess what? You can very easily attach small C4 explosive on that, and then you can train it to attack either a specific person's face, you can train it to identify a person, a particular individual, and then fly to that person's head, and then detonate the C4 right at the skull.
That is a
And
very terrifying thought.
the thing is though, is that this isn't sci-fi.
This is a real thing.
This is a thing that you can just put together. It's just a thing that you can. This video was put up by Stanford, by the way. Uh, and it was because they did this because they wanted to sign a petition so people don't do this, right? A few
Hmm.
months later, Mossadegh, the president of Venezuela, right? He was almost assassinated by a drone. You can look it up on
Oh my,
YouTube.
yeah, I saw the video of that. Was that really what it was?
So that was
This.
a yeah, it was a drone, but he only survived because this is, I guess this is protocol. They have jammers around his speeches. So those jammers cut off any remote control radio signal that you're sending to your drone, and so those drones, once they got too close, they stopped being controlled, and then they either fell down, hit a building, and exploded, or something else. The thing is, those were radio controlled. They were not AI controlled. If they weren't radio controlled, then they could just keep going. Those jammers wouldn't do anything. And so literally, it was just he probably wouldn't have been alive. He probably wouldn't be alive today if
Hmm.
those drones had image recognition algorithms on them, and they were trained to go after his facial model. Yeah,
I'll be honest, like the thoughts of AI, I mean, the implications are just like terrifying in so many ways if there's not a lot of controls or ethics discussed around the topic. I mean, it's.
the thing is, what are you gonna do? The issue with this is that people like so. This is just one. Again, this is not a scientific problem. This is an engineering problem. So it's just a matter of someone being creative enough in outthinking you. So this was just something that we managed to think of
Hmm.
before people started doing it. It still didn't do anything. People still tried to do it anyway, right? Now
Hmm.
imagine when you have people who are thinking of these things faster than you can think about the weapon. And so these new weapons will start coming out, start emerging, right? Before you even got the idea that this was a possibility. It's this is the thing about engineering. It's just like taping two things together. It's just putting one and one together and being like, oh, I'd never thought about doing that. That's actually very terrifying, but very
Right.
very ingenious. Like yeah, like it's super simple. And actually, what they show in that video, you really should go and watch that because it's you can basically train that thing to identify people by their skin color, by any future you want, and because they're so small, you could. The issue with nukes is that when you kill they'll kill a large population, but they'll also irradiate the entire place that you just attacked. So it makes that
Hmm.
a whole place unlivable. So it also hurts you in the process by using it. And you could use like toxic gas, but that also has its own issues as well. But one scene they show in the video is that literally you could just you could fly a giant bomber hangar or plane above the location you want to detonate these things, and you can literally release millions of these little tiny drones out into the sky, and then just
Yep.
have them pop
There's been
people.
some scary videos of that. You see like an army of like drones just like flying in unison.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. You can have it's crazy. You can even make it so that once in this as the technology advances, you can make them solar powered, and so you can have them land in location and then just turn off and just wait for the right time on order. You could program them where if they feel a certain sound or vibration, or if they recognize a certain person's voice, then they'll turn on, and then they'll go after that person. There's so many creative things that you can do that I haven't even thought of all the things that you can do. Uh,
Hmm.
it's the thing is I have thought of something like this before. I didn't think of C4, but I did think of surveillance because I have worked in the Air Force as a geospatial intelligence analyst, and I'm like
Hmm.
our job that I was doing there was going to be it was going to be automated, and you could just use drones and little tiny drones with cameras, and you could take more data. But yeah, attaching explosives to them is just like it literally was just another step away that I didn't think of, and that just goes to show how easy it is for people to come up with, you know, ideas that just people haven't thought of because
Hmm.
it's just you have to just sit and think about it. Um,
Wow. That is crazy. Just like the applications and the dangers of AI and just drones is just
it's and that's
it's
just
over the
one
top.
thing. It's just one thing. That's the thing. It's just one thing. There's so many we don't know. We just don't know. There's so many different applications for
Hmm.
AI that, like right now, for example, and Black Mirror is really on top of this. It's crazy how on top of like it's kind of eerie, but there's this episode in Black Mirror where basically people have a social credit score, and if you do something that, let's say for instance, the government doesn't like or something, your social credit score gets lower, and so you can't use public transportation, you can't work certain jobs, and anyone who interacts with you, if someone's married to you, their social credit score also goes down. Any
I
people who
believe
are
Asia
friends.
does this already.
Yes, exactly. They do this already, but they did this like that's the thing. Black Mirror essentially predicted this before they started putting these
Oh
image
wow.
recognition cameras up. And so now students, when they have to go into schools in China, there's like a door that opens up only when they scan their face.
Do you
And
think this is ethically necessary in the
ethically,
future? I'm saying, and
mm,
okay, when this is like a scary thought though, because it just seems like we're moving towards an environment or a society where there's a lot of controls over what people do, and if you have, I
yeah.
guess, a social score, so to speak, that seems fairly dangerous to impose on
Or
society.
like for example, if you don't take this vaccine, your social score will get lower, and everyone gets a ping that you don't have this vaccine, so they want to stay away from you, and then you get ostracized by your community because of yeah, it's like this is something they can totally do in China, and this
Hmm.
they are doing these things to a very real extent, and it's like it's kind of normal already. The fact that a lot of people don't really know about it, but yeah, it is quite normal,
Hmm.
and it's very scary. It's very crazy, like what they're doing in China right now, and yeah, there's no reason why our governments can like won't start doing this, especially if you give them a reason or you give them the opportunity.
Hmm.
I would not. I don't know about the ethical. You can make up a lot of ethical arguments to try to back some idea like this, but at the end of the day, you're using machines to surveil on people and to control them, and that's a lot of power. And
Yeah.
a lot of human beings would like power like that.
Hmm.
Um,
I can't speak for everybody here, but I mean, at least in my own personal opinion here, I think that we're literally opening Pandora's box with
yes,
artificial intelligence.
yes, that's exactly what we're doing. It's it's crazy. No one knows anything. It's like a yeah, it's crazy. Um, regardless of what's happening, here's the thing. Regardless of what's gonna happen, the one thing we can say is that it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be very very interesting. Uh, let's hope to make this turn out in the best way
Hmm.
and the best outcome. And again, I really do feel like it just comes down um to individual human beings just becoming more caring, more loving,
Hmm.
more
Being
compassionate.
rational actors, and
Yeah, being rational, but at the same time, I do feel like rationality only gets you so far because the thing is no, because the thing is that you can rationalize the most cruel things.
right.
You can make all this so rational.
It's
Yeah,
all
because
relative, so
because of course we needed to treat the population like sheep because they weren't intelligent enough to help themselves, so we needed to help them.
hmm.
You can make as many arguments as you want to do these things, and people will. They'll find a way uh, to.
Well, well, let's change the tune here a bit.
Yeah, it got dark real fast.
Yeah, so
I do feel like if AI does if we can build this in the right way, uh, we can literally create heaven on earth.
I
So this
really
has the
hope so.
potential to create. This really has the potential to either create hell on earth, create heaven on earth, or just destroy earth altogether. It can go in those three ways. And
Let's hope we choose the right door.
yeah, yeah, really.
So one of the interesting things to come about from your work is that you discuss the possibility of using vector space AI's unsupervised learning algorithms, and I've talked about vector space AI with Cation Franks, who is the technical co-founder of the company, on the first episode of my podcast.
Hmm.
And you have one of the opportunities to analyze data from the Large Hadron Collider in direct collaboration with Cern and
Yes.
Vectorspace AI. So I'm curious if you can kind of break this down in terms of the partnership and potential of applying this technology to Cern's data.
So this partnership started off at the at Venus University. I met with Aurelius, Professor Aurelius. He's head of the Cern department here at the university, and I, I I I basically just came into his office and we just started having a conversation because I was interested in what he was doing. And then I mentioned some of the, I guess, technology that I have access to. And then the idea just came to me. I'm like, well, you guys have a huge data problem.
Mm-hmm.
What if we just take your data and then analyze your data using our algorithms? And he thought about it and he realized that actually this hasn't really been done before. At least there is some tentative research on this, but it's not anywhere near the scale of what we're going to be doing. And and yeah, we basically see what I see here is, and what he sees as well, is just it's a low hanging fruit, because AI is still very it's still very new to the scientific community. They haven't really used it in so many
Mm-hmm.
fields where it's like it's almost like you don't even have to try. It's just you just apply it, and then instantly there's new discoveries just because it can see things that humans can't see, because
Right.
it's too much data. And even not only is it too much data, it's too complex. Humans can't analyze and can't analyze high dimensional data to the extent that AI can. And and so this is essentially what we're doing. The first thing we're going to be doing is running simulated experiments, because you can actually they have simulations of the Large Hadron Collider, and we're going to take data from those simulations first because the data is more simple. Uh, and then if we can prove our if the experiment is successful, then we'll move on to the live experiments on the LHC, and which will be much more difficult because the data that comes from the LHC is raw data, and so we're going to have to actually um, engineer that data so it's understandable by the algorithm. And
So what kind of data are you trying to extrapolate with vector space AI here?
so we're essentially going to take all the data you'll see in the collisions that all the data you'll see that's generated from the collisions that happen between these subatomic particles. And our main research goal here is to we're essentially we we want to um, extract objects from the data, um, which correspond to particular Feynman diagrams or physical processes. And Feynman diagrams, basically, Feynman diagrams represent the physical interactions of subatomic particles.
Mm-hmm.
And so our long-term goal is to train this AI to classify these diagrams at a diagram by diagram level. And to put that in more simple terms, basically we're training this thing to understand the physical uh, interactions that happen between these subatomic particles. And so if it can understand that, it will basically begin to
Mm-hmm.
understand how yeah how the universe works at the most fundamental and microscopic level. And
So you're saying we can get insights into the universe based off of utilizing these algorithms to extract data from the
yes,
LHC.
yes, there's a lot of data that comes out of the LHC, and the people are making discoveries all the time in the Cern community, and this is this is really a golden opportunity. It's yeah, we have the very real possibility to find something that's not only to discover something that's not only useful to the CERN community but also to the whole physics community as a whole.
So
Uh,
is this the first time you're saying that a company or an institution like this is using AI at this level with
yes,
vector space AI
yes, yeah. At
to
this level, yeah. As far as Aurelius has told me, and he's been with CERN for 13 years. He was also there when they found the Higgs boson.
I want to pause this for a second here, actually, since you mentioned that, because I'm sure most people, including myself, have heard of CERN, but only in regards to the discovery of the Higgs boson, which you just mentioned. And to many, that doesn't really say much. So, can you give people like a brief lesson as to what CERN is and what makes their work so important?
so essentially, CERN is this. It's actually a giant organization around the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a community. It's an organization of scientists around the whole world that are collaborating to basically understand more of how the universe works at the most fundamental scales. And the way how they do this is they have these giant rings. It's not just one ring; it's actually multiple rings, and
Hmm.
it's quite complex and ingenious how the firing mechanisms and basically what they do to get the beams of the beams of particles to collide with each other. But essentially, these particles will they'll speed them up so they go very very fast near the speed of light, and then they'll like kind of like on a train track, they'll change their direction to go down different rings or different tunnels. So eventually they collide with one another. And in those collisions, which are millions of collisions per second, um, which all generates an enormous amount of raw data. You can essentially understand what is going on inside those subatomic particles because
Hmm.
as they hit each other, they rip each other apart, and so you see more what's inside, and um, and you also get to see how these different subatomic particles interact with each other. And another thing though that I actually only recently learned, being with Aurelius and talking with him, is that the I'd always thought that I mean I had known about Cern for a long time, but I basically always thought that it was just a microscope to peer deeper into the universe by
Hmm.
basically ripping it apart. I thought that's what they were doing, which is I mean that is what they're doing, but eventually I learned that actually the particle accelerator actually can create new exotic particles when you smash them together.
What does that mean exactly? Creating new particles?
It means that normally these particles wouldn't exist because they would never be in these conditions to come together. And most of the time, these particles, when they come out, they don't survive very long, only like a few minutes because they decay too quickly. They're not stable, which is probably why they don't exist, because they're not
Based off what
stable.
we know of the universe, or is that an absolute where these particles simply just do not exist in the universe?
As based off of what we know. Now, the thing is that there may be islands of stability, and we don't know this, and this is why AI is can be very very useful here as well. But essentially, and the thing is, you won't even see this on the website either. Anywhere you really go, it's like they always talk about the particle accelerator as if it's just something to look deeper into the universe, but no, that's not just
Right.
what it's doing. Even when I talked to Aurelius and the other professor that was there, it's like they were telling me this, but they weren't making the connection. I had to say it to them, and then they kind of just looked at me and they're like, yeah, yeah, it is doing that because the thing is that it you can use what they're doing there not only to destroy, but you can also use it to create. So really, what they're doing, it's not just a microscope. Really, what they're doing is they're playing with creation and destruction at the most fundamental level of the universe.
So, what are the implications of that? Because that sounds somewhat dangerous.
It is. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. And then also we're gonna give it to AI. Yeah.
It's like a
Right.
double whammy.
Yeah. Right. It's great. It's fun. But at least what I see here is that if we can understand how the universe works here, basically, if we can understand the nature of creation at the most fundamental levels, then basically we can create new kinds of atoms, wholly exotic atoms, wholly exotic materials with completely different dynamics and properties that we've never seen before. And
So, when you
that's
say
another Pandora's
creating,
box.
yeah, but when you say creating new atoms with different properties, is this? I had a conversation on my prior episodes with Dr. Gordon Chu, and we were talking about his work in the scientific community, and he worked specifically on, if I'm not mistaken, he did research of graphene, and
Hmm.
he talked about the potential applications of, scientifically speaking, creating materials similar to that of like Iron Man, for example. So when he says that,
Yes.
are you implying the exact same thing with the
Yes.
discovery of new atoms?
Yes. Yes. You can. Oh, suddenly, like, or another example is, for example, building a space elevator. The main limitation there is that the wire, the steel wire, like it won't be still actually because it's just gonna rip apart. But whatever it's made out of, the wire is just so long, and the forces that are acting on that giant wire
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna pull something all the way up to the atmosphere is so strong that it's gonna rip it apart. And we don't really have, again, this is between a scientific problem and an engineering problem. uh, and you saw this a lot in the space program. A lot of the things that they wanted to do, the materials did not exist at the time, and they had to engineer these new materials to even be able to engineer the thing that they wanted to engineer in the first place.
Whoa.
And but here, that's the thing, though. What I love about an engineering problem is that once you get to a sufficient step, you basically have to lock a bunch of scientists in a room long enough and they'll figure it out. If you give them enough of a reason to figure it out. And yeah, this yeah, with this, you take material science to a whole new level. You can, I mean, it can go so far to, well, you can use it to create new kinds of weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You mentioned that vector space AI is being used to kind of look at the data from the LHC,
yes.
but to add to that, are we talking about the data that is being pulled from smashing particles together, or from the data that is being used to create new forms of atoms?
So it's they're both the same. And in order to create these new atoms, naturally these atoms are created. So not only are these particles ripped apart when they smash into each other, but
Mm.
they also can bind together during the collision
Oh, wow.
and then form new uh, exotic particles. And so they're both happening at the same time, and it's just all raw data that's coming in. You're just seeing, essentially, whenever these collisions happen, what you're seeing is just the interactions that happen. You're seeing all the dynamics that happen within those
Mm-hmm.
from those collisions. I would say the main issue is to be able to understand their behavior. You want to understand the laws that are going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And the main issue right now is that as we continue to smash these particles into each other, you just keep seeing more and more and more. It's like an infinite fractal zoo of particles, and it just keeps coming out. And yeah.
Are you with this work that you're doing? Are you finding hidden relationships between these particles?
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, we're basically finding hidden relationships that happen because all essentially what all this is relationships. It's all a bunch of relationships between how these particles work, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, we're essentially going to look in the data and see if we can find hidden relationships that people haven't found. Hence why they're hidden, and the reason why they would be hidden would be that there's just too much data and it's too
Mm-hmm.
complex. And this is just the nature of the limitation of human beings with our. Yes.
You mentioned that this is pretty much the first time that this is being done on at least this level. So, do you think this is something that we can expect a sort of partnership to pave the way for more applications of unsupervised learning algorithms on the vast amount of research being conducted by other institutions as well?
Yes, that is the long-term research goal, as Aurelius also points out as well. If this is successful, it will, yeah, it will pave the way for a lot of new things. You can for sure unsupervised learning will be used more and more within the Cern community,
Mm-hmm.
and likely Vectorspace will be a part of that because we'd be the first persons to be successful at it. And
Wow.
but I think it goes beyond just that. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if we really can if we can understand more about the nature of the universe through this, that could very well be Nobel Prize worthy. So this is not just uh, that collaboration. It's science. It's science, and
Mm-hmm.
we're essentially helping in scientific discovery here.
Is there something that you're most excited about with this collaboration between Vector Space and CERN?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just excited to see what we're gonna find. I don't know what we're gonna find. Aurelius doesn't know what we're gonna find. It's just
Hmm.
like, yeah, this is new, and if it does work, man, I'm gonna get to be a part of a Cern project, and we found new particles in the universe. That's like, I don't know what other
That's
thing to
awesome.
put on my resume or something. That is like, that's
Hmm.
awesome. That's amazing.
What has been the most, or what has been the greatest accomplishment by CERN up to this point? Because I know there's the Higgs boson, but there's also another term that's been brought up, which is the God particle as
No, they're
well.
both the same, I believe.
Oh, they are. Okay,
Yes.
one and the same then.
Yeah.
Okay. Has there been any other potential breakthroughs since the Higgs boson back in 2012, to your knowledge?
Um, Not to my knowledge, because I'm not a particle physicist.
Mm.
You can probably get Aurelius on
Ask
this
Aurelius.
show. Yeah, you probably have to ask him on, because actually the thing is, this would not have happened if it wasn't for his help. I only came with the AI side of things. He didn't really know much about AI, but he knew a lot
Hmm.
about particle physics, and I just basically said, I explained unsupervised learning to him so he can understand exactly the tool that we have and what it's capable of. And then he just thought about it for about 15 minutes, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we can do this, this, and this. Maybe this would work."
Hmm.
And this was over actually a few. That was the initial idea, but over some months he kind of refined it, I believe. And yeah, this essentially this is a collaboration between both of us. He found, because he understands the actual specifics of what goes on in the LHC and the specific problems that they're currently facing. He was
Hmm.
able to see how we could apply this tool to any of those problems. And yeah, this is what's so important about transdisciplinary research, is that he wouldn't have seen this though if I didn't come and talk to him, because he doesn't know a lot about AI. He's a
Right.
particle physicist, not an artificial intelligence researcher. And but we need to be able to communicate, and this is
Hmm.
why the advancements happen at the intersection between fields. It's when you have tunnel vision and you're stuck in your own little field that you
Hmm.
can't see. Um, yeah. So, and this is, yeah.
I don't know. This is unbelievable stuff that you're working on. Like even just like the history of your work in AI and the research of the universe. It's mind blowing to think of where we are currently at and what the potential for all of this is in the next few years or coming decades for that matter. It's
It's it's crazy. Yeah, it really has so much potential for scientific research, and it's really surprising that it hasn't really been used in that way. For example, another research project I was going to set up at the
mm-hmm.
university was, originally I was intending to do this. I wasn't really going for Cern, but Cern came out of this, which I'm glad. That's even better. But I was originally going to go to the neurobiophysics department, and I talked to them about it, and I just told them about our capabilities, and I wanted to know their whatever what other problems they'll be facing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
much more knowledgeable about neuroscience, so I could really foresee what we can do there. And one of them, they were doing a research project using a 64 channel EEG, and
What is
uh,
that, by the way? A 64 channel EEG?
it's a giant. You probably people have seen it before. Likely, they put all these like nodes on your skull,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very advanced. It's You can buy EEGs, the simple ones, for like a few $100, but I think they're only like 12 channels. They're not that advanced. 64 channels has a much higher resolution, so it's actually useful it's actually useful for scientific research. The issue, of course, again, is data. It's just too much data. We can't understand it. And so this is where AI comes in. Most of science right now is an information problem. And as soon as I talked to the professor there, he's like, "Yeah, absolutely, this would be useful. You for sure would find something in this data." And then I went over. He said, but the thing is, he wasn't in charge of actually
Mm.
initiating these research projects. I had to talk to the dean of the life sciences department. I talked to her, but guess what? She was like, "Well, you don't have a degree and blah 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 blah, and you're not about." It was ridiculous, and this is the problem with science, and this is the problem with academic institutions, is that a lot of this scientific research can simply be halted because of bureaucracy, or because someone's
Right.
because of something as a human problem, because of ego, because of whatever. Aurelius was very, even though he's very smart, he was he let me come in his office and he literally sat down with me for 3 hours and we just talked. And then out of that, we started a research project together.
That's how it should be. I mean, science has no borders. You shouldn't be limited because you don't have a degree. I mean, some of the greatest minds on earth don't have a college degree, but are achieving at the highest levels in society. So it's incredible to see that there are at least some open minds out there who are willing to see the potential of a
Hmm.
lot of these scientific ventures and to pursue them. So I think it's absolutely incredible the work you're doing and that Aurelius is doing and willing to open his mind to. So it's really cool to see,
Yeah,
Roshan.
it all happened because he just sat down and talked with me, and then he would yeah, that's really how it all started. And it's the same thing with Cajun. Like I called Cajun. We had like I think 3 hour, 4 hour conversation. We've had a lot of long conversations, and yeah, just from that one conversation, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna hire you. Sure, you should join the team, and I'm very grateful to Cajun. Very, very grateful, and it's kind of been the same thing with all my mentors and people that I met in life. It's yeah.
That's awesome. So it looks like we're coming up on time here, but as I do with all my guests, I have a couple of closing questions that I would like to ask you, Roshan. So we'll just get started with these real quick. The first question being, who or what has been your greatest inspiration and why?
Richard Feynman,
Mm,
easily, because he just explains things in such a simple way, and not only that, you can see his enthusiasm, his love for what he is actually talking about. You see this in any of the best scientists. And that's the thing, not all scientists are the same. And here's another thing as well. You'll notice that the best scientists don't just make one discovery, they make multiple discoveries. Multiple groundbreaking, world changing discoveries in their lifetime. So it's not just a like a roll of the dice. It's not just one scientist got lucky. No, it's because this scientist thinks in the right way. He's not just smart, he's thinking in the right way. If you look up Richard Feynman's IQ, it wasn't high. I believe it was only 112. It's
mm-hmm.
He's an amazing scientist, and you could see that it was in his passion, and he loved it when other people understood. He would say that everyone's a scientist. It's just a way of thinking, and even
Right.
then he would wholly admit that science wasn't all there is. This Richard Feynman was literally talking about the brain being a quantum computer when he was alive. This was in like the 1980s. Like this, it's crazy. This is what he was talking about. But while all other scientists were just like, no, that's a crazy idea. But no, Richard Feynman was like, no, this is, of course, why not? Of course, it can be a quantum computer. Why can't it be? But and the simple reason is that biology doesn't care. Biology is just an evolutionary system that tries to maximize and take advantage of whatever it can take advantage of. So if there's a biological possibility of wet quantum computation, and it has billions of years to figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, of course, probably it did. But no, now we're accept now the idea is becoming a bit more popular and actually talked about. But at that time, like any professor would have laughed you out of the room if you even tried to mention the brain and quantum computation or whatever. And yeah, so Richard Feynman, hands down.
In the grand scheme of
Oh, and Freeman
things,
Dyson.
oh,
Sorry,
go for
Freeman
it.
Dyson, who was a friend, a damn good friend of Richard Feynman. He was basically his mathematician because Richard Feynman would do some of the like I guess surface level mathematics, and then
Hmm.
he'd give it to Freeman Dyson to flesh out the rest. You kind of see relationships like this between physicists and their mathematician friends. And Freeman Dyson was freaking amazing. Unfortunately, he recently died. Unfortunately, he recently died this year, actually. He was
Hmm.
93, I believe. He died from a simple fall. But the thing is, he was so sharp. Every time he would come, he'd still go back to the Institute of Advanced Study. and he would go there and research all the time. He was still solving groundbreaking problems even when he was 93. You can go on YouTube and look up. I talked about it before. There's a talk, an hour-long talk on analog computation about the brain, and he's 92, and the guy is more creative than people my age. The things he was conceiving of was like it was blowing my mind. Yeah, this is the same guy that thought of the Dyson sphere, which is surrounding the sun. He thought of that. He thought of a Type 2 civilization, uh, which would surround the sun and a bunch of solar panels, and then suck the energy directly from the sun, and then use that energy to manipulate the universe. And
Wow.
he came up with so many different ideas. It's yeah, Freeman Dyson also too, because Freeman Dyson didn't have a PhD. He didn't care about that. He would even say things that other scientists wouldn't actually agree with. He for example disagreed with climate change, and when that's heresy in the scientific community to even question that, he no he was a rebel. He was a rebel. Yeah, and yeah.
That's incredible, honestly. Just like the minds of some people and how they kind of challenge the status quo in that sense. That's impressive. So, in the grand scheme of things, what is your vision for AI in the next 10 years?
This actually leads me to something that I wanted to mention. There's a quote by Freeman Dyson's son. His son is George Dyson, and that quote is let me find the exact, because I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
butcher the quote. All right,
Yeah.
but I love this quote because it's one of my favorite quotes, and it really I think it really sums up my ideas on AI, which have changed a bit over the years. Uh, but let me see if I can. Yeah, I know exactly where the quote is because I have it in my. I actually put it at the bottom of my paper that I'm working on right now. uh, all right, here it is. Um, Nature's answer to those who sought to control nature through programmable machines is to allow us to build machines whose nature is beyond programmable control. Hope that it's clear to everyone here. All right.
What is your interpretation of that?
Before I used to think that part of man's advancement is learning to control nature,
Mm-hmm.
and this was me in like high school. I had some different ideas back then, but I yeah, I felt like it was about more control and more building things that are more powerful. And it wasn't that I necessarily wanted the power. I just wanted something out there to have it. I don't care if it was me. I don't care if it was other people. I just wanted something, and for it to continue to build and continue to grow. And I, and this is kind of how our Western thinking and our scientific thinking has been for decades, or I think over since the Industrial Revolution, which is about overcoming nature, controlling it. And but I like this quote because it's like through AI, I thought yes, this is the biggest thing. It's the biggest control, but the interesting thing is that it's like it's almost nature's answer to us, nature's answer to those who sought to control nature through programmable machines is to allow us to build machines whose nature is beyond our control. That's its answer, and
Wow.
that's a beautiful answer, and I love that. And this is Freeman Dyson's son, George Dyson, and he talks about the same thing. Anyone that's listening to this, definitely research into analog computation and AI, and you'll see George Dyson and Freeman Dyson, and it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's I feel like this is where it's going. This also means that yes, it will have free will. Yes, you don't have control over it, but that's also what makes it intelligent. That's what
Mm-hmm.
yes.
What has been the most fascinating but simple fact about intelligence or the universe that you know?
What's fascinating and simple fact about the universe? Mm. The brain, which is the most complex computer in the known universe, computer, intelligent machine, whatever you want to call it. It's the most intelligent thing that we know of, most complex and intelligent thing that we know of, and we do not understand it. It emerges from something as simple as a few, as it emerges from a simple chain of amino acids. It's a long chain, but it's we essentially have mapped most of our DNA. So we have like the code. We have all the code there. And that code gives you the instructions to build not only all of life, but all of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it essentially, I guess, the most fascinating thing is emergence, is the nature of emergence. How the how something can be larger than the sum of its parts, which gets back at Stephen Wolfram's discovery of computational irreducibility. And yeah,
If you could share a message with the listeners out there, what would it be?
follow your heart.
And then the last question: what would you most like to tell people that no one ever asks you about?
That no one ever asked me about. Oh, that's a hard one. Oh,
Save the most difficult question for last.
yeah. What I like to tell people that no one ever asked me about. What do people never ask me about? I'm actually not sure about that one. That's a yeah,
No worries. We can leave that as a mystery.
yeah, that's a bit of a hard question.
All right. No worries on that one. I have stumped some people with that question, so no surprises there. So, that said, Roshawn, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation, and I have truly enjoyed having you on the show today. You have some incredibly fascinating thoughts on artificial intelligence and the nature of intelligence in the universe. And for those who are interested in kind of staying in touch with you, contacting you, or learning more about the work you do, where can they find you exactly?
They can just go to my website. It's just RoshawnTerrell.com.
Perfect. So I'm going to make sure to post some of those links in the description of the episode, including your website and some of the videos that we mentioned today. But again, thank you so much, Roshawn. This has been awesome. So,
yeah, likewise. This was a really good conversation. Thank you, Tesher.
With that said, that'll do it for this episode of the All Things Interesting podcast.
Time is the most valuable thing that a man can spend. Man has time. Time to think, to plan, meditate. Energy is a timeless force.